Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians with their government. We're pleased and honored to have the Senate Majority Leader with us today, Senator Tommy Norment. Good to see you, sir.
Woody, it is an absolute delight to be back with you in 2018, and thank you for being here, sir.
Well, it has been about a year since you were here, and of course you have represented the 3rd District with great distinction and honor over the last 20+ years. Take us back to what got you involved in politics. I know you're a Blair High School graduate, a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, and a graduate of the College of William and Mary School of Law.
And all of that is accurate, but I'm getting so chronologically aged that it's hard for me to remember back that far how I got interested in public service. I served one term on the James City County Board of Supervisors, and the last year I was chairman of the Board of Supervisors. And at that time, the community where I lived was represented in the Senate by a legendary irascible gentleman from the Eastern Shore. And I remember when I was chairman of the board, we presented our James City County legislative agenda to him for his consideration. And he returned it, and he had just flipped it over on the back page, wrote no, and that was the extent of his consideration of our legislative agenda. I was friends with Herb Bateman, who had served in the Senate of Virginia and also in the United States Congress. And Congressman Bateman got together and collaborated, unbeknownst to me, with some other folks, then with Senator Tribble and Senator John Warner, and they schemed to convince me to run for the Senate of Virginia. And particularly Congressman Bateman, who was my mentor, I was very sensitive to what his suggestions were. And so here I am 27 years later.
So what are some of the major differences between now and then?
When I first came into the Senate, in it wasn't 1699, by the way, Woody. It was 1992, and I came in, and of course at that time there was a very significant Democratic majority in the House of Delegates and in the Senate of Virginia. In the '91 election cycle, the most number of Republicans elected to the Senate had taken place since Reconstruction. And so it was the largest contingency that we had in the Senate. Another one of my mentors, who interestingly enough was a Democrat, was Senator Hunter B. Andrews. And he actually ran the Senate, and there was no mistake. He was the majority leader. He was the chairman of the Finance Committee. He was a very forceful, almost an iconic personality. But when I came to the Senate, interestingly enough, the friends that I had in the Senate were all Democrats. I did not know any of the Republicans, and I knew the Democrats because of practicing law. And in my community, I came across people like Senator Hunter Andrews, Delegate Ted Morrison, Delegate Alan Diamond-Steen. I knew Senator Richard Holland, and they were very kind. And even though I was in the minority party and a freshman, they were generous to me on committee appointments. You contrast that with now, we have 21 Republicans and 19 Democrats. I think some of the partisan atmosphere that is contaminating Washington, D.C. has floated across the Potomac and down 95. I find the Senate, while it's still collegiate, is much more partisan. There's a greater, I think, polarization on the issues. There is no single dominant personality like Senator Andrews was. And that's not a totally bad thing. It forces both sides to have a meaningful discussion on issues. It forces compromise. And I have a very peculiar theory of government. I think the tension in the legislative process is a good thing. And I think the proximity of a balance between Republicans and Democrats is good because it forces you to compromise. And if you don't compromise, then you don't necessarily come out with the best legislative agenda.
Now, when you first arrived here 27 years ago, what was the state of technology?
That is really a wonderful question. I am an IT idiot. I joke with I teach at William & Mary, and the first class I always joke with my students, and I say, I really don't know anything about technology and IT. I said, I just learned the other day what goggling was. And they look at me in total disbelief. And they mean Googling? Oh, yeah, Googling, that's what it was. When I was elected, I was practicing law by myself, and I did have an internal communication system that was computer-based. I came up here to Richmond in 1992. There was no such thing as a computer. There was no such thing as a fax machine. If you wanted to talk to your senator or your delegate, you wrote them a letter, or you called long distance and you paid for it. I disassembled my modest law practice and brought it up here and set up my computer systems between my aide and myself. A lot of people kind of looked at me like, what is this unusual guy? You contrast that with now, we have toll-free lines where if people are dinosaurs and use the phone, they can call in. We have a sophisticated system of computers. On a controversial issue, I might get 300 to 600 emails a day on an issue. So the change in technology has provided greater access. People don't have to travel, in my case, 52 miles to be here to communicate with me. So it's much more sophisticated. We have iPads that we can take onto the floor to monitor the legislation. So technology-wise, we've come an awful long ways.
To what extent are those iPads a significant distraction during the course of debates from your perspective?
I don't find them a distraction at all. I really haven't noticed any significant distraction amongst the other senators. To me, it's very helpful as I try to lead the protocol on the floor of the Senate. It's very helpful. I still have a hard copy of the calendar for that day with my notations on it. And the reason I do that is just in case there is a technical snafu with the iPad and I can't get to what I need. But I use the iPad and keep it open as we're going through the daily agenda because I can hit a button and it will produce the entire bill that is under consideration. Because in our calendar, the hard copy of the calendar we deal with, it only has a 2 or 3 line summation of what the bill is. And sometimes I just want to go back and check the exact language. So the iPad is great because you can hit this little button and it'll produce the whole bill and it'll produce the voting history of it and everything. So they're really a significant enhancement. But like a lot of people my age, everybody's not using an iPad because it is so foreign and disruptive to what they're accustomed to.
I believe there's been some 2,600 bills introduced between the House and the Senate. I believe the Senate has about 938, but I believe you've disposed of about 25% of those bills already.
That's a modest understatement on the Senate. I say this with pride. In the 27 years that I have been here, I have never seen the Senate committee process work so efficiently. We have moved forward in an efficient and a thoughtful way on so much of the legislation. I'm expecting by Monday With a little bit of luck, we may in the Senate be down to 50 bills left to deal
Wow.
with. The House of Delegates is struggling a little bit. As of this past Monday, I think they had done about 3.8% of the total bills filed by their delegates. On the other hand, when we started out this Monday, we were almost at 40% of the bills that had been introduced in the Senate that we had finalized. And our committees have been working very hard, uncharacteristically structured. I've changed the way that we approach the process a little bit, and it's been very efficient. So I'm expecting on Monday, this coming Monday, that we'll be well along and close to wrapping up our business.
Now, you continue to co-chair the Finance Committee. How has that worked out with your colleague, Senator Hanger?
I think it's worked out fantastically. Senator Hanger and I are friends on a personal level. I think that we complement one another very nicely. He is much more of a numbers-oriented person than I am. I am more of a policy-oriented individual, and I mean, it's no secret, as long as I've been on the Senate Finance Committee, from the very first day they ever brought me on, my major role has been a compromise to make a deal. And I think that's a strength that I have. I'm pretty good at looking, if someone were to put the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle in front of me, I'm pretty good at putting those pieces together. I might not be able to create the original mosaic and have the vision of what that picture is, but you give me the pieces and I'm pretty good at putting the pieces together. So I like to make the deal, but I like to make things happen.
Now, almost every day there is a meeting of the Democratic caucus and a meeting of the Republican caucus. I take it both of those entities discuss their strategies about what's going to happen on the floor of their respective bodies. They usually begin at noon that day. Is that an accurate description of the caucus meetings generally?
Well, I can only speak for one. The Democrats revoked my invitation to their morning caucus meeting, so I really don't want to speak for them, but I'm happy to chat with them anytime they'd like to hear from me. Obviously, I attend the Senate Republican caucus meetings. We meet at 11:30 every morning before we go into session at noontime. We review the controversial bills that we expect will come up on the calendar that day. I have Mark Obenchain, who's doing a great job in reviewing those bills. So verbally, he reviews them with the caucus. I might share any of the procedural issues that I see coming up, and I might share some encouragement or admonitions depending on what the subject is. So we really do have that sort of last-minute discussion and orientation. And you've been up here for years. It is very, very challenging to get all of the members of your caucus together at one time, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Because we do more in 45 or 60 days up here than the United States Congress does in a year, the velocity that these pieces of legislation are moving is daunting at times. You said 2,900 pieces of legislation. I'm not very good at math, but let's round it up to 3,000. Mm-hmm. 3,000 divided by 60 is really close to 50 pieces of legislation a day that the Virginia General Assembly is dealing with. And the velocity and the intensity is terrific, but also we want to be certain that we're giving each piece of legislation a thoughtful consideration.
You talk about how efficient the Senate is running this year, especially at the committee level. To what extent do you collaborate with the minority leader, the Democratic leader, to ensure that continues?
Well, Senator Saslaw and I are very close personal friends, even though perhaps we have an ideological divide between us, and he has a job to do in maintaining the cohesion within his caucus, just as I have a responsibility. So he and I communicate a great deal. We share a number of committees. together. So he and I communicate a lot. As far as our other members of our Senate Republican caucus, they do try to communicate with the Democratic counterparts. That's not happening 100% of the time. We obviously know where there's going to be a significant disagreement on an issue, and it may be a partisan issue where the Democrats have one persuasion and the Republicans have another. We might, out of courtesy, have a brief conversation, but there are some bills that, in spite of the collegiality, it's not going to change anybody's mind, and so we don't spend a lot of time laboriously trying to argue back and forth on a smaller group because we know what the outcome is going to be. If there's a particularly charged bill that I know our 21 Republican senators are not going to support, I might, as a matter of courtesy, say to the Democrat minority, I just want you to know that this bill is not going to be met with warmth and affection. So we do try to communicate some, but there are significant ideological issues that go on, and that's characteristic and important of a deliberative legislative body. That's inherent within the system.
What's the most frustrating thing about being the Senate Majority Leader?
It's very challenging sometimes. I used to be fairly prolific in the number of pieces of legislation that I would introduce. If I go back a few years, when my dear friend, then Senator Stolley, who's now the sheriff of Virginia Beach, was here, he and I took the lead on many, many issues. We introduced quite a few pieces of legislation. The demands on trying to coordinate and maintain the cohesion within the Senate Republican caucus is taking a significant amount of my personal time, and it's taking a greater amount of energy. Everyone has and is entitled to their independent thought, but sometimes trying to develop a consensus within a body even of 21 takes some patience, and sometimes it takes some deliberate efforts. So there are a few nights where I leave here and I don't feel like legislatively I've accomplished very much because I've just concentrated on maintaining the cohesion within our caucus. I'm very honored that our caucus continues to support me in my leadership position. I've got a great leadership team. I expanded that in an uncharacteristic way that had never been done in the history of Senate Republicans before, trying to involve more members and younger members. I think I've got a responsibility to cultivate leadership in the next generation, so I try to do that. But unlike the House of Delegates, and this is kind of inside baseball, but it's really very important, unlike the House of Delegates where the Speaker rules, and the Speaker makes all the appointments to committees, he can put you on a committee and pull you off that committee the next day if he's annoyed with you. So the Speaker, under their structure, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, under the structure of the House, they have a carrot and they have a stick that they can use. Very different in the Senate of Virginia. As a majority leader, I don't make appointments to any committees. I can't remove anybody from any committees. So it's demanded that I develop a skill set of consensus building because I really don't have that stick that where I can bring someone into line with discipline. So I have to be patient. I have to give our 20 other members an opportunity to be heard and hopefully have the insight based on what I'm hearing from our senators to develop a consensus and lead us or show us a pathway where we can function together. I was surprised a number of years ago. I spent a week down in North Carolina at a school called the Center for Creative Leadership, and it was a diverse group of about 20 individuals from across the country, a lot of corporate managers. We had a brigadier general in there, and we went through every test imaginable before we went there to find out what your strengths and your weaknesses were and your persuasions. We did a lot of team problem solving. A lot of it was videotaped, and you were critiqued one-on-one. And out of that group, it shocked me because I came out with the highest score as a consensus builder in that group. And I never thought of myself as a consensus builder. I don't think that I was a bully, but sometimes I can be pretty firm-handed. And it was really an awakening for me. But all of that kind of slumbered there until I became the majority leader of the Senate with 21 and realized I've got to develop a consensus. So it was like a reawakening, if you will, or a renaissance of that skill set that was really developed down in North Carolina.
Is there an opportunity as the Senate Majority Leader to meet with state counterparts every so often to compare ideas and discuss things like leadership and consensus building?
That's a wonderful question. And frankly, if I am critical of myself, one of the areas of criticism I have is that over the years, I really have never been active in some of those national organizations like NCSL or the Southern Leadership Conference. I just haven't done those organizations. In the last year and a half, I have become more engaged. And I remember I was in Boston this past summer at the NCSL, and it was a summit meeting, and it was a huge gathering, representatives from every state in the union, simultaneous work sessions going on every subject imaginable. And I left Boston and I thought, Tommy, you are a real numbnut. All these years that you have not done this, you have missed the opportunity to be exposed to some very creative ideas that other state leaders are advancing. And so I've become more engaged in that, and actually a couple of initiatives that I'm looking at going forward have come out of attending those national conferences. They are not boondoggles. I've worked very hard at them, but I've come up with some good ideas that might range from Mississippi to Rhode Island. So sometimes plagiarism can be the most flattering form of approach that you can take, and I'm just reminded that there are a lot of smart legislators around the country, and I'm happy to replicate their ideas.
Now, the General Assembly takes great pride in the fact that they are a conglomeration of citizen legislators. How difficult is it to maintain that? We live in a much more complex society. Technology has advanced, as we talked about earlier. The demands upon your time have become more and more. So how difficult is it to maintain that kind of mentality?
It's very challenging, Woody. As a majority leader of the Senate Republicans, I've been involved in candidate recruitment in election cycles like 2015. As I have gone around the state and have tried to encourage certain individuals to run for the Senate of Virginia, and I have some criteria myself, is that I'm looking for pro-business people, some that have business experience, some fiscal experience, that they're willing to listen and entertain ideas that they themselves have not created. Very challenging. The time commitments have increased remarkably since I got here in 1992. Remarkable commitments. The compensation, not that anyone necessarily in state legislators, unlike some of the people that go to Congress,
Sure.
the compensation really hasn't been adjusted. And so there's almost an adverse selection process. As a legislator in Virginia, you've got to have the flexibility of time. You've got to have some independent sources of revenue, because the time that you are going to commit is taken away from your opportunity to earn money.
And to put that in perspective, I think the salary of a state senator is about $18,000, and over on the House side, it's a little less than that.
It is.
Okay.
So you can't really look at it from a monetary standpoint, but there are those individuals who really cannot afford financially to make the commitment to be a legislator. And I think that's resulting in some adverse selection. I mean, we've had several senators that have left the Senate of Virginia and gone to Congress. They make $180,000, you know, and I think last year they worked 101 days or something. We're down here going for 60 days, but it's not just 60 days. It's when we're out of session, all of the committee meetings that you go to. So the compensation is an issue, not to make it attractive, but to in fact compensate some of these individuals for the time that they spend. I happen to be an attorney, so, and I'm a trial attorney. So if I'm not home for 3 months, I'm not generating revenue. I've been very blessed though. I've been very blessed. The $18,000 a year that I make is not of a moment. It's not a consideration for me, but you think about people like Delegate Cox. When he was Delegate Cox, he was a school teacher. I mean, he's not teaching for 3 months. Or Chris Jones, who runs his own business as a pharmacist, and he's not there for 3 months. Somebody's got to keep dispensing those medications, and he has to pay for that. So it's a conscious decision that we make, and you have to look at the reward as, am I making a significant contribution to improving the quality of life of Virginians? And that should be my compensation, but you still have to meet your expenses.
Got a few remaining moments, but I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about the great people of the 3rd District that you represent, and give us a little bit about the lay of the land there.
Well, the lay of the land is fairly extensive. I think I currently represent about 13 jurisdictions. We hear an awful lot about redistricting and nonpartisan redistricting. And my good friends in the Senate, when we did redistricting, it was controlled by the Democrats. And they drew these districts, and hence I don't represent Williamsburg anymore, which had never been separated from James City County in the history of the Commonwealth. But that's just politics, so I don't say it with any degree of resentment. But 13 jurisdictions, I represent King William and King and Queen County, which are very rural communities. And then the district runs all the way into downtown Hampton, Virginia, which is a completely different atmosphere. It's the inner city with different challenges than the rural part of the district that I represent. So I tell my friends when I'm asked about it, you know, what do you think about this diversity that runs almost from the Richmond city limits to almost to the North Carolina border? And I said, you know, it was a great opportunity to make a lot of new friends, and I thank you for that privilege of making these new friends. So trying to balance the interest is a little challenging at times because they're so diverse. But you just have to have a positive attitude and do the best that you can, and you're not going to make all the people happy all at the time, and that's just the way it is. So I've enjoyed the opportunity to represent these people, and I've been very blessed that they continue to reelect me.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, Senator Tommy Norment, the Senate Majority Leader.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.